Welcome to Advocacy Politics Unplugged, the show that will dissect critical policy issues, explore the art of advocacy, and share insights on how to make your voice heard in today's ever-changing political landscape. I'm your host, John Ravitz, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Business Council of Westchester. We're very thankful to our sponsors, Con Edison and Verizon. Con Edison customers, are you looking for an efficient way to heat and cool your home? Consider geothermal heat pumps. These innovative systems turn energy from the ground around your home into cooled or heated air for climate control, providing you significant energy savings and year-round comfort. Con Edison is dedicated to sustainability and helping customers save. That's why they offer incentives for installing geothermal heat pumps. Eligible homeowners could receive rebates that significantly lower their upfront cost. By choosing geothermal, homeowners won't just save money, they'll also reduce their carbon footprint and contribute to a cleaner environment. To learn more about geothermal heat pumps and available incentives, visit coned.com/geothermal. It's a smart choice for both homes and the planet. Don't just connect your business, make it even smarter. Partner with Verizon to gain the control, security, and speed to overcome challenges and adapt in real time. Verizon's cutting-edge networking technologies can help you build a strong, agile foundation for your organization. They help schools and small businesses access the essential technology they need to compete in today's digital world and are on a mission to help solve some of the biggest challenges the world faces today by leveraging their technology, innovation, and people. Verizon is working to open doors for many communities through digital skills training, grant opportunities, and more. To protect the planet for future generations, they're investing in renewable energy and improving the efficiency of their networks through the power of technology and shared knowledge. Verizon is helping people build the confidence to change lives for the better. Our guest today is Chelsea Lemon, who is the Senior Director of Government Affairs at the Business Council of New York State. Chelsea oversees policy on antitrust, consumer affairs, financial services, and technology and telecom. In this role, she develops strategic advocacy, engages with policymakers, stakeholders, and drives initiatives that align public policy with member priorities. Prior to joining the Business Council, Chelsea served as the Legislative Director to the New York State Senator Jim Garon and was a senior advisor to several members of the New York State Senate Democratic Conference. Chelsea, welcome to the show. Thank you for being on with us.
Thanks for having me, John.
So for those of our listeners who do follow the Albany calendar, we are in the throes of budget session. Obviously the governor released her budget. They've been doing joint budget conferences between the Assembly and the Senate over these last few weeks. The governor just released her 30-day amendments, and now obviously the negotiations really kick in. One of the key priorities I know for the Business Council of New York State has been dealing with regulatory reform as being an important priority for being put into this budget that will help businesses across New York State. And we were very proud at the Business Council of Westchester to be part of the Business Council of New York State and the New York State Economic Development Council's project, which created a document called Blueprint for New York, creating a roadmap for change. The BCW was very excited about being able to be part of this. I think we hosted the first, what was a series of business roundtables around the state to really give the person who was going to be working and drafting the report an opportunity to hear from businesses. And the blueprint came out in September. I remember we were all at the Sagamore when it was introduced, and the governor was going to come the next day, and there was to speak, and there was some trepidation that she might not take kindly to the recommendations. But the opposite happened. And the recommendations hopefully have been what it was intended to be, which was to give the governor and the legislature that roadmap to deal with some of those issues. And, there were two things that really struck me that were in the very beginning of the report that I continue to talk about, which really shows why this is so important that the governor and the legislature wrap their arms around this. George Mason University came up with a statistic that said that New York State is the second most regulatory state in the country, and that in New York, there are 300,000 regulations containing more than 17 million words, all hitting key business sectors. So to say that this is an issue that has been a long time coming to try to resolve is an understatement. Can you give us a little background, again, on the Business Council of New York State's reasoning for really putting this project together and what you're hearing so far about the recommendations that the governor's looking at?
Yeah, so, this was really a joint partnership partnership between the Business Council of New York State and the New York State Economic Development Council. Ryan Silva and our CEO, Heather Mulligan, this all kind of came about over lunch one day. They were talking about how there hasn't ever been, one report that kind of captures the things that businesses are dealing with on a daily basis, but also, addresses our competitiveness from many different angles. And so that was kind of, where this idea was born, and what it turned into was a really, it was incredible. It was a huge, statewide effort where, like you said, we did in-person roundtables. So the Business Council of Westchester hosted our first roundtable, but then we did 9 more regional roundtables after that, partnering with chambers across the state, from, the Buffalo Niagara Partnership down to the Long Island Association, across the state up to the, North Country Chamber of Commerce. And at each of those roundtables, I'd say we had about 30 to 40 different businesses and their representatives to really sit around the table and delve into the issues that they're dealing with on a daily basis. There were certainly some regional components to it, but the overarching theme was the same: is that we love New York. We love doing, we want to be in New York, but it's so hard to do business in New York because we are constantly burdened by, regulation after regulation. The legislature is the most prolific in the entire country. In the 23-24 legislative session, they introduced over 24,000 bills. And so, on top of that 300,000 regulations and those 17 million words, there's new statutory laws that are putting in place regulation every year. And so businesses find it very hard, especially small businesses that don't have the human resources or compliance or legal teams to keep up, find it very hard to continue to do business and, be in compliance with the laws and regulations. So that was one. Obviously, the cost of living and taxes was another that we're certainly looking to address. But how do we really improve our competitiveness? The report, what was really great about the report is that it couples the quantitative data, right? The data that our economic consultant put together with the qualitative feedback from businesses across the state. So in addition to those 10 roundtables, we also did, I think it was 12 industry Zooms, where industry representatives came and spoke to their specific, industry. But again, like I said, the overarching theme was the same. It's so hard to do business in New York because we're piled on with regulation. One of the industry roundtables said, I can go in and I can get a, authorization for another line of business with, Department of Financial Services here, but it's going to take me a year and a half, where if I go to Florida or North Carolina or another state, I'm looking at maybe like a few weeks to a few months top. And just kind of looking at it from that perspective, our ability to, continue to offer services to New Yorkers that they want and need sometimes gets caught up by the amount of regulation that we have.
And I guess that's really where the disconnect is, right? I mean, obviously, as you said, 24,000 bills that were passed last year in the legislative session in Albany. Introduced, but and some were one house bills, I'm sure, and not two house bills. But one of the things that we heard from on our roundtable was that the regulations keep changing, so that all of a sudden you think you have a handle on it, and you've assigned somebody from your team to oversee it, and then a year later they come back to you and say, "Wait a second, we're totally lost now." So,
or you're not sure where you stand because you have a state law, but then that conflicts with what you're supposed to be doing at the local level or federal and state, vice versa. It's all the same kind of the layer of regulation. Sometimes they don't always, work together.
Our guest this afternoon is Chelsea Lemon, who's the Senior Director of Government Affairs at the Business Council of New York State. We're talking about the project that the Business Council of New York State did with the New York State Economic Development Council, along with the Business Council of Westchester and other business membership organizations around the state, to create this blueprint for change. You're dealing with the legislature every day. What was their feelings or reactions when they got a chance to look at the blueprint?
Receptive blueprint. Let's talk about what the governor has done first of all. So, when the report came out, the governor's team, they delved right into it. And they said, okay, thank you've presented us with all of these things, and it's great. So what can we do about it? And some of the recommendations we had, are to utilize Empire AI to review all of our rules and regulations and find those areas that are redundant or duplicative, or just completely out of date. And so, they've worked towards doing that. The governor in October, when she goes out to all the agencies, Blake Washington, her director of budget, directed all the agencies to take a look at those rules and regulations and see where they could make improvements. And so I know coming out of that, they've addressed, I think, over 100 regulations that they're looking to, either repeal or make amendments to. But then it was just about 2 weeks ago, she just announced, within her budget, she had, a commitment to let's address the rules and regulations that are burdening, businesses. She just came out with a website. It's Express New York, where she is soliciting feedback from all stakeholders as to how can they cut red tape and make life easier for New York businesses. And so I really encourage businesses to go onto that website and provide the feedback. If they can't tackle statutory regulations right now, just because that also takes an act of the legislature. So they're really looking at these executive regulations that they can address. And I believe that is open until April 3rd. And then the legislature has been also very receptive. Assemblyman Alex Boras has a bill that's introduced where he utilized AI and went through all of the rules and regulations and found kind of those like really crazy things. Like they're so crazy that it's like, in order to make a certain type of financial transaction, you have to, use a boat or like crazy stuff. So we're really happy with how the legislature is responding. And I think, tackling regulations will certainly make things easier for New York businesses. There's still a lot of work to do, though.
There is. And I'm glad you brought up the Express New York portal that the governor has opened up. We are actually just sent out to all of our members, 1,100 plus, the explanation of why it's important for them to really utilize that Express New York and put in their suggestions, because this is going to have to be a long-term project that happens. And using technology, small world, Assemblyman Boros represents the Assembly District I did for 12 years. And so I'm glad that he's taking a leadership role in that, because when my second term in the Assembly back in the prehistoric days of the 90s, that's when then Governor Pataki created the Office of Regulatory Reform.
Yeah.
And they had one mission, which was to really drill down, to look to see, again, what regulations either made no sense whatsoever or were duplicative or just could, again, be eliminated. And again, it was that two-way communication between businesses and government to make sure that everyone could be on the same page.
Yeah, and I think, the areas where we could certainly improve is, bring back, GORE. Like, can we have a real fiscal impact analysis of legislation before we implement it? Because, it's not just a state and local impact, which they, technically are supposed to put into their bill memos, though most of the time it's either TBD or NA, and that's not necessarily the case. But how do we have that full, perspective of how a bill could impact the economy? And, that's a really important analysis.
Well, there was always be that line, when you see a bill memo, and I know I don't want to get too into insider baseball for our listeners, but when a legislature introduces a bill, they are supposed to not only just put the justification for why they've introduced this bill, but what the fiscal impact would be. Yeah. And I always remember my eyebrows would raise when I would see that either they would be no fiscal impact or they would say fiscal impact to be determined. Yeah. And that's not the way to govern, because again, somebody's going to be left, having to deal with those burdens and those obstacles. And I think, again, this is one of the things that I know all of us are hoping that this blueprint will remove some of the obstacles and burdens. And you all hear it every day because you represent businesses across the state. Those are some of the reasons why businesses are either thinking of leaving or have left.
Or they're leaving. Yeah. In the governor's budget, she also put in some reforms on the SECRA process, the State Environmental Quality Review. Mm-hmm. The A kind of loses me. But so, those are important because, those permitting processes are preventing us from kind of reaching our affordable housing and building goals, right? So how do we, continue to reach big, right? But we need to get out of our way in order to do that.
You're listening to Advocacy and Politics Unplugged, part of the BCW Podcast Network, sponsored by Con Edison and Verizon. Don't just connect your business, make it even smarter. Partner with Verizon to gain the control, security, and speed to overcome challenges and adapt in real time. Verizon's cutting-edge networking technologies can help you build a strong, agile foundation for your organization. They help schools and small businesses access the essential technology they need to compete in today's digital world and are on a mission to help solve some of the biggest challenges the world faces today by leveraging their technology, innovation, and people. Verizon is working to open doors for many communities through digital skills training, grant opportunities, and more. To protect the planet for future generations, they're investing in renewable energy and improving the efficiency of their networks through the power of technology and shared knowledge. Verizon is helping people build the confidence to change lives for the better. Con Edison customers, are you looking for an efficient way to heat and cool your home? Consider geothermal heat pumps. These innovative systems turn energy from the ground around your home into cooled or heated air for climate control, providing you significant energy savings and year-round comfort. Con Edison is dedicated to sustainability and helping customers save. That's why they offer incentives for installing geothermal heat pumps. Eligible homeowners could receive rebates that significantly lower their upfront cost. By choosing geothermal, homeowners won't just save money, they'll also reduce their carbon footprint and contribute to a cleaner environment. To learn more about geothermal heat pumps and available incentives, visit coned.com/geothermal. It's a smart choice for both homes and the planet. Our guest today is Chelsea Lemon, who's the Senior Director of Government Affairs at the Business Council of New York State. So obviously, over these next few weeks, the budget is supposed to be passed by April 1st. Last year, that did not happen, and it was a late budget. But hopefully this year, it being an election year for the governor and for members of the Assembly and the Senate, that they will get it done on time. And the session is usually broken up into two parts, right? It's the governor does her State of the State in early January, then she introduces her budget. As we discussed at the beginning of the show, then the budget process begins. Once the budget's passed, then you go to post-budget. And that's really where so many issues are going to be addressed. And I know that you cover a lot of those issues for the business community at the Business Council of New York State. One that I know, because I've seen the memos that you've just sent out about some of the legislation that is being introduced, has to deal with the privacy and consumer data issues.
Yeah.
And again, this is where I think, as a former legislator, I have a better understanding once I've left the bubble of Albany that legislators probably have all the best intentions in the world when they introduce a piece of legislation, but they don't think about the unintended consequences of how that one piece of legislation could impact business sectors that they probably didn't even think about when they were drafting the legislation. But when we talk about consumer data issues, there's just so much out there, and the technology obviously is changing. Where are we in New York State compared to other states, and what are you trying to really focus the legislature on during these next few months in Albany?
Yeah, obviously giving consumers, control of how their data is used is a huge hot topic issue here in Albany. And I think what is missing in New York that other states have adopted is, other states, absent of a federal privacy framework, have adopted their own comprehensive privacy laws. And so it's not usual that, the Business Council of New York State is coming out and saying, hey, we don't have, a reasonable comprehensive privacy law in New York State. We should work towards that like other states like Colorado or Virginia have done, right? And let's have that framework that those states have put in place, because while they all have very, minute differences, they all follow a similar framework in terms of what your business obligations are, what the consumer expectations are, and what their enforcement is. And what we're seeing here in New York, absent of that, is many different pieces of legislation that all deal with the same issue. How are consumers, in charge of their data, and how are businesses using consumer data? But it's so piecemeal that essentially we're building a roof without having a foundation. And so a lot of these bills that we're dealing with, whether it's, algorithmic pricing or biometric data, could all be handled if we had a comprehensive privacy law.
So if we want to build that foundation, so that any bill that is introduced in this area area actually does what it's intended to do. Are you talking to the legislature about how to put the bricks and mortar to that foundation together?
We are. I think it's a very big issue to tackle, right? And so as business, we're coming to the table and saying, we're ready to do this. We need to do it in a way that is like what other states have done so that we're not kind of building this patchwork framework. Because when you have a patchwork framework or, in New York, if you're going to do something different, like what the Health Information Privacy Act does that the governor, vetoed last year, thankfully vetoed because it did create this, very different framework, is you're introducing operational compliance costs on businesses that are going to, not only increase their costs, but those costs are going to translate to increased consumer costs. And so when we're looking at affordability, we want to make sure that we have an interoperable system with other states so that we're not introducing new consumer costs here in New York.
And again, I think that's something that all of us who advocate on behalf of businesses have to continue to remind the legislature. Affordability is a word now that everyone's using, and that's important. But
And
what we
everyone has
always
their own definition, though,
right,
right?
it
And
does.
I think we need to have a better understanding that when we're talking about affordability, it's not just a one-layer issue, it's a multi-tiered issue. And so you have to have everybody at the table who is a part of the economy to really have a thoughtful conversation.
And to remind legislators about the affordability of doing business in New
Yes.
York. And as
Yes.
we've talked about already in this episode, there's so many regulations and obstacles that put that negative impact on businesses of all sizes. So, the privacy consumer data I know is a key issue, but there are other issues that I know that you spearhead on behalf of the Business Council of New York State. Legislation that continues to be introduced. That again, we have to remind legislators about what the unintended consequences are. I know there are some top level ones that you've been overseeing for the Business Council. Can you just share a few of those with us?
Sure. So there's this bill called the 21st Century Antitrust Act, which we, have continued to raise concerns about over the 5 or 6 years that it's been introduced, mainly because it introduces a very different antitrust framework from the other, 49 states in the country, but also, kind of imports this European Union standard. But the way that the EU is set up economically is different when it comes to competition. So to introduce this new framework in New York, again, going back to what I just said about privacy, when you have different frameworks, operational costs go up and things like that. But, when advocates are looking at that bill and saying, this is what we need in New York, we need to reform our antitrust laws because, competition isn't fair, they're not looking at kind of the trickle down effect. And so last year, we, worked with some economists to put together, different studies and to show legislators, the real hard facts of, well, if you do this, here is what the economic impact to your region is going to be. Here is the economic impact to the small businesses who might not be, directly captured by the bill and you think might be benefiting from the bill, but actually are not because of how the ecosystem works.
Well, and let's stick with that for a second, because obviously when it comes to the antitrust legislation, the sponsors obviously were going after the big fish, if you will. And again, rightly or wrongly, that's what I assume their intent was. But as you just said, so many other businesses, smaller businesses, and even non-for-profits would have been affected by the way the legislation was written. So when you go in and talk to legislators, again, what are some of the things that you've tried to focus on in the bill that make them think, wait a second, this is probably going to cause more harm than good?
Well, I think having to walk through kind of our positioning on what is competition, what is healthy market competition, that's, one thing. But what I always learned, as a former legislative staffer, like I said before, you have to bring it down to how is it going to impact their constituents? And that was really the reasoning behind doing kind of these economic studies, is to say, hey, you know what? If you institute this bill, you might be going after kind of the big fish, but those big fish also contribute to your economy, and they partner and work with, all of these other companies within the region. And so there's going to be a trickle down effect. And, you could lose, $1 billion in the first year for your region if this is instituted, just because companies, you have to assess their risk, right? And I think that sometimes that's a missing piece, is that, risk assessment.
Yeah, it's the related businesses that obviously would be touched into. We're running out of time, but you just talked about something that I'd love to hear more about, because The show is titled Advocacy and Politics Unplugged. Our goal is to help folks understand that we do need to advocate on behalf of the business community. But you started your career in Albany working in the legislature and transition now to really advocating for businesses, but having to deal with some of the same people that you dealt with every day in the Senate. How was that transition for you, and what were some of the skill sets that you learned when you were in the legislature that you're using now for the Business Council of New York State?
Yeah, I mean, it's always nice to have that 2-year cooling off period. But then you go in and sometimes it's a different legislature.
And we should just
And
let our listeners know the 2-year cooling off period is that if you're a legislator or an employee of the
yeah,
legislature and you leave and you go into an area where you are going to be lobbying the legislature that you just worked for, it is a 2-year period before you can
yeah,
actually walk the halls and sit down in front of
yep.
legislators.
Yeah, so it was nice to get back. It was like, what, a year or two ago at this point. It was nice to get back, but I think the transition is the same because, I'm here at the Business Council and I'm advocating for my membership. My membership is my constituency. And that is the same thing that, lawmakers are coming up to Albany every day. They're going back home to their districts and they're advocating for what they believe is best for their constituents. Or, just we're all working towards the same goal. I think a lot of times we just need to be better about coming together and really listening to other sides and maybe just being a little all sides being open-minded.
Was it easier for you as a former staff member to be able, even with the 2-year
Maybe.
period, to be able to go in and talk to a sponsor of a bill and say, look,
Yeah, yeah, but
let's
it's
look at
also a
this.
little nerve-wracking when you go in and
Sure.
you're having to talk to a member that you've known for so long and you're kind of advocating for a certain position. It's an interesting dynamic to get used to. But yeah, they're people, right? The lawmakers are people. And I think just going into it with I always hated when people came in and they handed me like 50 different papers because, I'm as a staffer, you're taking, 15-minute meetings all day long. Your members doing that. And so to kind of like end up with a bunch of papers to have to go through, I loved it when people came in with like the one pager, what the ask was or what the issue was. And so when I, go in with my advocacy, I try and do it in the simplest way possible to get our message across and make sure that they understand what the core issues are. So I've kind of taken that approach and also, building small C coalitions, making sure that they understand, I as a business council might be raising an issue, but, nonprofits are impacted by this. Small businesses are impacted by this. And while you might be going after the big fish on this bill, you're still imposing the same, rules and regulations on the small business.
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'll ask you one last question on Albany. What's changed? I mean, obviously, again, you've been on both sides, both inside working with the legislature and now lobbying the legislature. Is there one or two things that you've noticed over the last few years that have changed in Albany that, it's the reality, but you have to deal with?
I mean, I think the reality is, my background is I worked for members from the Long Island, area. And there aren't, the 6 members that when we took the Democratic majority in 2019, those members aren't there anymore. And I think, if they brought a certain perspective to the table that, isn't as vocal as it used to be. And I think when you see a lot of primaries that are happening across the state, whether it be, in the Assembly or the Senate, a lot of people are having to deal with primaries from the left. And that is certainly, bringing a different perspective to Albany. And I think it also changes how we have to respond as a business community.
That's so interesting because I remember when I was in the legislature, I was in the minority in the legislature, but in the majority, there were never primaries.
Yeah, and now
And so members didn't have to worry about changing their mailing schedule. They certainly didn't have to worry about campaigning earlier than usual. And it's so now to be able to have that pressure on you as you're trying to deal with the budget, as you're
yeah.
trying to deal with post budget, it definitely changes the dynamics.
It definitely
Any way,
does.
shape,
And,
form.
we've moved up primaries and all of that whole calendar has changed. And so I don't have to deal with that, right? But, I think it's certainly something that weighs on members.
Yep, without a doubt. Our guest today has been Chelsea Lemon, who's the Senior Director of Government Affairs at the Business Council of New York State. Chelsea, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for the leadership role that you play at the Business Council of New York State, working on key issues that really do have a have daily impact on businesses, but more importantly, issues that either we want to see happen in business that we can use to recruit and retain businesses to New York, and also try to stop legislation that, again, is going to cause people to say, you know what, we just can't afford to be here anymore. So again, thank you for all that you do. I'm sure I'll see you on the halls of Albany
Yeah,
soon. And
thank you, John.
we
And
look
thank you
forward
for
to the.
everything that you guys do at the Business Council of Westchester.
Well, I
Fantastic
appreciate that.
partners.
It's great partnership. And that's what I think, again, one of the things that I've seen since joining the Business Council of New York State is that you can build coalitions across the state that really do have an impact and hopefully have an impact on legislators. So thank you for joining us. This is John Ravitz. I'm the Executive VP and COO for the Business Council of New York State. You've been listening to Advocacy and Politics Unplugged, sponsored by Con Edison and Verizon, and part of the BCW Podcast Network. And hopefully you'll tune into our next episode.
Be sure to check out the BCW Podcast Network's expansive lineup of shows: Leadership Unleashed, What's Trending, Advocacy and Politics Unplugged, the Member Spotlight, and Nonprofit Voices of Impact. The Business Council of Westchester is the county's largest business membership organization focusing on economic development and advocacy. With over 1,100 members, it is our mission to work for the profitability of our members and the prosperity of the Westchester community. To learn more about the Business Council of Westchester, please go to thebcw.org.
The BCW Podcast Network. Build, connect,